Paul Feyerabend, an Austrian philosopher of science, developed one of the most radical critiques of scientific methodology in the 20th century. His main thesis, Epistemological Anarchism, argues against the idea that science operates or should operate according to fixed rules or methods. For him, attempts to enforce a single scientific method are restrictive and historically inaccurate. In his major work, Against Method, published in 1975, he writes, "The idea that science can and should be run according to fixed and universal rules is both unrealistic and pernicious. It is unrealistic because it is historically inaccurate, and it is pernicious because it is restrictive and is liable to hinder the advancement of knowledge." Feyerabend examined the historical development of science and showed that some of the greatest scientific breakthroughs, like Galileo's defense of heliocentrism, only occurred by violating the accepted standards of the time. Galileo used rhetorical and artistic methods to persuade rather than strictly empirical arguments, which wouldn't have been enough on their own within the dominant Aristotelian framework. He argues the church at the time of Galileo was much more faithful to reason than Galileo himself, and also took into consideration the ethical and social consequences of Galileo's views. Its verdict against him was rational and just, and the revision of this verdict can be justified only on the grounds of faith. This isn't to say that Feyerabend supported censorship or the church's authority, but rather that our judgment of historical science must be more complex than the simple triumph of reason over superstition. Feyerabend claimed that science is not fundamentally different from other human activities like art or politics, and that its authority should not be taken for granted. He criticized the dominance of scientific rationalism and warned against scientism, the belief that science alone can guide human progress. Feyerabend's famous slogan, "Anything goes," wasn't meant to promote chaos, but to emphasize that methodological pluralism, allowing multiple, even conflicting approaches, was vital for progress in science and human thought. He writes, "Science is an essentially anarchic enterprise. Theoretical anarchism is more humanitarian and more likely to encourage progress than its law and order alternatives." In his view, rigid adherence to a so-called scientific method can stifle innovation and marginalize alternative or indigenous ways of knowing. Instead, Feyerabend believed in intellectual freedom where competing frameworks could coexist and be evaluated without privileging one in advance. He says, "The only principle that does not inhibit progress is anything goes." He wasn't arguing that all ideas are equally valid, but that all ideas should have the opportunity to be considered. Progress, in his view, often depends on unconventional thinking that breaks established norms.